From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we go beyond the headlines and sound bites and bring you all the news that's important here in the state of Indiana. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndiaPolitics.org, come to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Today on the program, the impact of the coronavirus on the state of Indiana, and also we look back at the 2020 legislative session. And so join us in a very sterile environment, in case folks are wondering at home, is our good friend, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein. Brad, thank you very much for being with us.
Abdul, great to be here.
Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard. Jamar, good to have you back after a very close mayoral run up in Lawrence. Good to have you back on the panel. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And also with us, our good Republican friend, Pete Seat, former spokesperson for the Indiana Republican Party, now one of our panelists. So, Pete, thank you very much for being with us.
It's great to be 6 feet away from you. Thank you.
Hey, you sound like my wife this morning. So there we are. So I also got to keep the Republicans and Libertarians about 12 feet away from each other these days. We'll jump on a more serious note. As we have this discussion, we're easily looking at hundreds of Hoosiers being diagnosed or with the coronavirus, COVID-19. It has taken a major effect on local economies with business shutdowns, travel restrictions, etc. Brad, let me start with you because your capacity as president of the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce, you see the impact just about every day in your community.
Yes, this is going to be devastating. I estimate that of the mom and pop one-off local stores, retail outlets, for every week that they have to be shut down, you're going to lose about 3% of those. And it's just people don't have reserves. Oftentimes these businesses are running week to week, month to month, just like their employees are. And the longer they're shut down without revenue, the rent still has to be paid. You've still got to pay your taxes, even though that's going to be delayed a little bit. But this is going to be tough. So I'm urging all of our members and anybody who follows us, use your discretionary dollars and spend it local. That money stays in the community a lot longer, but it's going to be a different world when this is over.
Let me jump with you, Pete, because obviously the governor, and then the past week or so, they made numerous announcements on things they're doing to help mitigate some of these things, whether it is closing schools to help prevent the spread, but also moving the primary back to June 2nd. We're talking about giving businesses extra time to file, pay taxes without penalties. Are we doing enough at the state level to mitigate the spread of coronavirus and its economic impact?
Yeah, I think Governor Holcomb, Commissioner Chris Box at the Health Department are all doing an incredible job. What they have done to date has been responsible, credible, and necessary. I mean, none of these decisions are easy to make because each and every one has a ripple effect. Take closing schools until May 1st. That affects seniors. It affects testing. There's a lot of things that happen here. And, the governor, Eric well, he's always thinking 2, 3, 4 steps down the road, and that's what this situation truly does require because we don't know what will happen next. We don't know how long this will take. So I've been proud of our state government and our leadership and how they've been tackling this and how seriously they've been taking this from the very beginning.
Jamar, let me get you in the list because I had a conversation recently with Dr. Woody Myers, the Democratic presumptive nominee for governor, who did not criticize the state, say what we're doing is wrong, and said we needed to do more to provide relief, to those workers that are being displaced because their businesses are being shut down, doing more to make sure hospitals have the equipment that they need. Is the state doing enough, or can it do more?
Certainly, there's always more that can be done, but looking from the perspective of a leader who not only has to make decisions about what is done, but also what isn't done, particularly to make sure that there isn't widespread panic, that we're not using those cash reserves too quickly, or that we're using them on the right things. And also the timing, going back to what Pete said, and making sure that we're not putting the horse before the cart, so to speak, and other variables in the future at risk. So yes, we can always do more, but I think Governor Holcomb's done a fairly good job, a little behind other states that are even surrounding us, but a pretty good job at making conscious decisions that are well-timed and still conserving your cash. This is cash conservation time. So any way that we can protect ourselves and protect our state, especially without strong federal leadership, is good for the state of Indiana.
Let me get you in and chime in this because for the longest time in Indiana, one of the big problems or big complaints have been of the Eric Holcomb and to a lesser degree Mike Pence and Mitch Daniels has been the state surplus. I remember former Democrat minority leaders saying Republicans treat the surplus like a holy grail or holy hand grenade of Antioch. Pick your Monty Python reference of your choice. Like this should have been used for teacher pay. Maybe it should have been used for this program or this program. In retrospect, is it a good thing that the state did keep the surplus as is? Because say it's a rainy day fund. I think it's raining in Indiana.
I will say yes, and I was thinking about this just a few days ago. But yeah, Indiana is very fortunate that we have these reserves. I mean, Indiana, I think, is going to fare better than most other states simply for that reason. I wish the federal government had reserves like that and had a balanced budget, but that's for another day. On something like this, and Jamar mentioned it a little bit, leading is hard. It's easy for us to sit here in the cheap seats and make comments on this because if you're in Eric Holcomb's shoes or President Trump's shoes, you're in a no-win position where either you're doing too much if it turns out that it wasn't bad, or if it turns out really bad, you weren't doing enough. And to find that sweet spot of where do you lead, how do you lead, how many resources do you expel now as opposed to conserving resources for the future, those are hard decisions to make. But fortunately, they've at least banked some money in Indiana, so I think that we can weather this for a while.
But I don't want to get ahead of you, Abdul, but there is something to be said for decisive leadership that empowers others to make decisions. That's hasn't been what we've seen from Donald Trump. We've gotten some wishy-washiness, changing his mind on a daily basis at his press conferences, walking back statements, and also leaving the onus on American governors to make decisions with their resources instead of empowering them to protect American citizens. We need more of that kind of leadership. And we've seen some of it from Eric Holcomb. We need more of that type of leadership on the federal level.
Let me get Pete to chime in on that one.
I want to chime in on the budget reserves, and I'm so glad you asked this question or brought this topic up because this is precisely why we have that rainy day fund. And you know it as well as I do. You mentioned it briefly. People are always saying, hey, let's dip into the reserves for this. Let's dip into the reserves for that. And strong Republican leadership has said no, no, no for this very reason. For something that we cannot plan for or that we don't expect to happen. And here we are now having a conversation about potentially dipping into those reserves in response to the coronavirus. Illinois is not having that conversation. If they get to a point where they need more money, it's going to come at the hands of businesses. It's going to come at the hands of taxpayers. Indiana is in a much better position to weather this storm than our neighbors are.
Let me get you to chime in on Jamar's comments on Donald Trump real quick.
I am not going to politicize this issue. This is a time where the entire country needs to come together, and we're seeing varying levels of that here in Indiana and around the country. I have been pleased that the administration, from the president to the vice president to Seema Verma to Jerome Adams to Alex Azar, note 4 of the 5 I just mentioned are from Indiana, are holding near daily press conferences in the briefing room of the White House, speaking directly to the American people, answering questions about what's happening and what's next. And I think that is a very responsible move. I'm glad they've done it. Maybe they should have done it a little sooner, but at least we're at the point where we're having that conversation now.
And, Pete, this isn't necessarily about politicizing President Trump's actions. It's more about watching how he's governing. And if that becomes political because it's an election year, that is what it is. But governance has to be chief, and we need strong leaders at the helm. They're going to help take us through this crisis.
You are watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guest today on our panel, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard, and Republican Pete Seat, talking about the impact of the COVID-19, that's the coronavirus, here in Indiana. Gentlemen, we all say these things should not be politicized, but fundamentally, I mean, this is an election year. Can you really, have these discussions about the administration's reaction to the coronavirus, or what Bernie Sanders and what Joe Biden have said, with respect to our healthcare system and how they would act without politics being brought into it? Did everybody jump in all at once?
Yeah. Politics is part of it. I mean, politics is you are selecting people to lead you for 4 years, for 8 years, for 6 years, whatever their term is. Some leaders are better than others, and I'm no Donald Trump fan by any stretch. And I think that probably where he's falling is somewhere in the middle. It's not a complete catastrophe on how he's leading us through this. But on the other hand, I think he's trying to play politics. I mean, he's now referring to this as the Chinese virus. And he's got people around him saying the Chinese virus. That is not by accident, and that is him politicizing this issue. I'm not sure that should be happening.
And I'll say the American people seem pleased with his leadership. The most recent poll I saw was actually flipped from where it started through when this crisis first happened. I think disapproval was around 55, 56% at that point. It's now the reverse. And 55, 56, 57% of the American people approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing. And why is that? Because he is front and center every day talking about this, reassuring the public, trying to calm the markets, doing all the things that the president needs to do. He is, similar to what I said on another show not long ago, his job and Mike Pence's job is not to suit up in scrubs and ask you where it hurts. Their job is to coordinate the whole of government effort to combat this virus, and that's what they're doing.
I also think it helps too that somebody probably in the White House said, Mr. President, your phone might be infected with the virus, so don't pick it up and get on Twitter. And the more you stay off Twitter, usually the better Donald Trump tends to do when he's off Twitter. But speaking of which, one of the things that the Congress is looking at to like I said, once again, to mitigate the economic impact of the coronavirus is, almost sort of like refunds to stimulate the economy. Checks, whether it's $1,000 a person or $1,200, $2,000. The thing that surprised me, and I'm interested in you gentlemen's thoughts, is this is all fine and good, but what good is you give me a check if I can't go out to the store or go to the bar or restaurant and spend it because I'm at home because I'm told to be quarantined and stay 6 feet away from people?
Well, so people will find a way to spend it, whether it's Amazon or picking up takeout or.
Don't give my wife more ideas,
whatever.
please, when she watches the show.
It is what it is. But George Bush did the same thing in 2008 when the recession hit, and people went out and spent the money, and it didn't solve the problem. But what I think this money can do is give Americans a sense of hope and a sense of peace that they'll be able to get through the next few months. The abatements on mortgage payments, car payments, and the tax deadline being pushed, all of those things, even though you still got to pay the back end of the tax on your or the back end of your car payment at the end of your loan, all those things at least give you a little glimmer of hope that the next few months will be passable and bearable and that you're not going to end up out on the street.
Then maybe that's what the government should have done. Just basically, all right, we're going to do sort of a, for lack of a better term, a national moratorium on everything. We're just going to sort of freeze everything, in place right here, right now. Your rent, your mortgage, your car payment. You'll still have to pay X, Y, Z, but until we kind of navigate through this and we can actually have people moving again. Brad, let me get that for you. I know libertarians, by their very nature, tend to be sort of government hands off. But is this one of those situations where you need actually government to step in because the private sector can't necessarily do it?
To some degree. I'm still not sure what I think about as far as bailout checks, just because there's a very specific segment of the economy, and that would mostly be the service sector. So bars, restaurants, servers, those are the people that are being hit hardest. I would almost like to see these funds directed a little bit to those people who are out of a job because the government said you have to shut down. Somebody like me, I'm going to get a check. I don't know that I necessarily need it. I will certainly spend it at my local retailers to make sure that money stays in the community and continues to roll around. But I think that, the bartenders are going to be the ones that need that money right now until they can figure out what they're going to do. In an economy like this, obviously, there's people that are hiring delivery drivers right now. And unless we're told to shelter in place, there's still economic activity happening, but we kind of have to reinvent ourselves. I'm looking at some of the restaurants in Lawrence, and they're getting creative. One of them is offering to sell any of the supplies that they get from their food suppliers to anybody who wants it. So be it flour, eggs, anything that they can buy in bulk.
Toilet paper?
Toilet paper, exactly. But they're willing to split
What's their
up those.
address?
It's Triton Brewery. Right? So, which they'll also sell you beer. So
Drive-through only. Yeah.
Drive-through only, you pick it up. But they're willing to break down some of those larger cases that they can get, which also helps because any food supplier like McFarling Foods or Dugdale Foods, if their business is decimated because there's no restaurants buying from them or buying very little. So you have to get creative, but that kind of creativity is going to be the ingenuity that provides the recovery from this.
So I think you hit on one of the big issues here, and excuse me, I'm about to get a little socialist, guys.
You're a Democrat, that happens.
So it's the fact that this isn't just 2008 where you have some people that lost money in their investments and some banks that were struggling and some individuals that were hurting. You've got entire businesses, like you said earlier, that can't function. So the private sector can't lift us through this. They can't push us through these quarantines and what's happening economically, and we will need help from the government to push through this.
Pete, let me get you in this real quick here before we take our break. I mean, is there a difference though between the government giving sort of society a bit of a push or a jump start versus driving the whole bus?
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys covered both sides of this particular topic pretty well. So what I'll say is this shows that Washington can work. I mean, you have seen how quickly the House and the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, have come together to work with the administration to pass. I think we're now on our third phase of legislation to respond to this.
You're probably the fourth phase by the time the show's over.
maybe the fifth or the sixth. I mean, who knows at this rate? But they're responding quickly, and that is so important at this time. I do think that sending checks to the American people makes sense. We all have bills to pay. Not everything is going to be pushed off or canceled or postponed, and we're still going to have to make ends meet throughout this crisis. So to me, it makes sense. We'll see how quickly it does get done, but they're working together, and hopefully when this is all done and over, that spirit will continue.
You are watching Indiana Issues. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. When we come back, the 2020 legislative session, where were the hits, what were the misses, and what maybe should have been brought up to the plate in the first place. So that, with our panel just a bit, you're watching Indiana Issues. And welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard, and Republican Pete Seat. Well, gentlemen, Indiana lawmakers wrapped up the 2020 legislative session. Lots of hits, lots of misses, depending on who you talk to. They took action on addressing healthcare costs, raising the age of tobacco possession to 21, also distracted driving, but a couple of things did not happen. For example, legislation that would have made it easier for the Attorney General to be removed from office should his license be suspended. That did not take place. And also, there seemed to be some back and forth between the City County Council in Indianapolis and the other end of Market Street, the Capitol building. So, Pete, let me start with you. How would you rate how lawmakers did?
I give them an A-. It's hard to do a whole lot in a non-budget session, but I think they accomplished some of the big goals, particularly when it comes to healthcare and the all-payer claims database and a prohibition on surprise billing when it comes to in-network and out-of-network billing. Those were big hits. Also, the distracted driving, the hands-free driving law. Shout out to Holly Sullivan in the House who carried that bill and did an incredible job bringing both chambers together on that. So I think it was a good session. Of course, there are still some big issues that need to be addressed, and those will be tackled when we're in a budget session again next year.
Brad, how do you think lawmakers did?
I give them a B. It was they did, for better or for worse, they didn't get a whole lot of accomplished, which for me, I like to see them not do much because usually when they do a lot, it's bad. So I was glad to see that transportation bill died that would have hurt Indigo funding. I feel for the people in Northwest Indiana. It was mostly their bill, and they ended up having to tank the bill over an Indianapolis issue. I think Indigo needs to do a better job of creating their foundation, but I also think there's a lot of people that now rely on Indigo, and the Marion County voters certainly said they wanted it. So I'm glad that the legislature did not punish them. I'd like to see next year them do a little bit more with gaming. I think that you're probably going to have a lot of casinos screaming for a bailout next year because they've been closed. I would kind of like to see them avoid that. I think the casinos are already doing pretty well. And certainly this is going to be an opportunity. When we talked about the small businesses that are really going to be hurting, there's been a proposal the last couple of years to put slot machines basically in private clubs and bars. And I think that that's a good way to help some of these independent local businesses as opposed to help bailing out the big conglomerations that own the casinos.
Jamar?
B-. Sorry, the grade's going down. So I echo a lot of the positive things that Pete said, but here's my rub with the 2020 session.
My Spiderson says it has something to do with landlord-tenant laws.
Kind of. It's the state legislature keeping their hands off of cities and towns, off of individuals, and off of specifically the city of Indianapolis. So the panhandling, the landlord-tenant issue, the Indigo issue, those are all things that should be handled by the city of Indianapolis. And because we've got a Republican-led state legislature and a Democrat super-duper majority in the Indianapolis City Council, the state legislature thinks that they can manhandle the city of Indianapolis and continue to take control, and that's wrong. The same thing with Attorney General Hill. There's a law and constitutional provision that no laws should be against a single individual or single government small entity. That bill was specifically against Attorney General Hill, and not saying that his actions were correct or that he shouldn't be removed from office, but I think it's an inappropriate use of the state legislature.
If I could dovetail in on that, I want to give props to State Rep Carly Macer. She said in a conference committee hearing, she goes, there seems to be a lot of senators and representatives in here who appear that they would rather be a city councilor somewhere. Maybe they ought to think about going back to the city council. And I think she was spot on with that comment that, that the state suddenly is getting involved in an awful lot of local issues that they have no business being involved in.
But what about the? Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Pete. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to go on the Curtis Hill thing. I mean, we're in uncharted territory here, and so while you may say that it's targeted at a specific individual because he is the individual going through this disciplinary process right now, it's about adding clarity to the law. And this could happen again down the road, but there is no clarity in the law about what would happen if the Attorney General is in fact suspended. And that's what they were trying to do. To your point, when you started this segment, Abdul, it depends on who you talk to whether or not they agreed with that particular piece of legislation. Obviously, Hill supporters were opposed, and people who don't like him were supportive of it. But I think it's unfair to say that it was targeted at an individual when it was targeted to this uncharted territory that we find ourselves in right now.
But let's say it wasn't targeted at an individual, but it was targeted in time. And if it's and
here's what, let me piggyback in, because here's what I always argued with the Attorney General legislation, which Curtis Hill and I have a good personal relationship, but I agree with the legislation in theory, because the law was unclear. That it's one thing if your law license is revoked, then it is clear that you cannot be a lawyer in good standing. The question always was, if your license is suspended and it can be not suspended indefinitely, what do we do? Are you still Attorney General or are you not Attorney General? So I agree with the law. I disagree with the timing. And I jokingly say the difference is the difference between me buying my wife flowers because it's her birthday versus me buying my wife flowers because I forgot it was her birthday. Yes, she is getting flowers, but the motivation, the timing, to me, the timing was the issue. And it would have been nice that lawmakers maybe done this back in January, or somebody like maybe the last session, hey, this is out here. What happens if the AG is disciplined, if he is license is suspended or revoked? And please note, and I will give lawmakers credit, a lot of people did a lot of research on this issue and looked through case law, looked through statutes, and everything came back. It's just unclear and we're not sure exactly what the heck's going on here. So
sure, clarify it, but you took the words out of my mouth in terms of timing.
So, real quick here before we get ready to wind down, we talked about lawmakers being sort of a super Indianapolis City County Council. The lawmakers will tell you, hey, under the Indiana Constitution, cities and towns are creatures of the state, and the state can pretty much do whatever it wants. So how do you come back with that argument, I guess?
Oh, this is directed
Yeah,
directly
sure,
towards
yeah,
me. Yeah, sure. So basically the constitutional provision says, and I walked down this earlier, is essentially that no single law should be applied to a specific city. The legislature gets around that by putting population or size requirements around
Or
those
we say
laws.
it's a consolidated city.
Okay. So it's still unconstitutional at its base.
Another thing, gentlemen, as we get ready to wind down the conversation, when we looked at what lawmakers did, I thought it was interesting. This kind of goes to the hands-free driving as well as the tobacco 21, because you usually would think that, as conservative as a lot of these guys are, that there's no way these things would have flown through, but apparently they did, and overwhelmingly. So, Pete, is this a new breed of conservative we're looking at here, or what got all these Republicans to change their mind?
I think public health and public safety transcends politics. Period.
I would have been vehemently opposed to this 21 regulation until I saw all those kids on spring break in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak, and now it makes me think they're just dumb.
You forgot to yell, "Get off my lawn."
Yes, exactly. So apparently I've gotten older and less libertarian. I don't know. With tobacco, I wish the legislature would just say tobacco's bad and we're going to outlaw it instead of nibbling at the edges and say we're going to tax it, we're going to raise taxes, we're going to raise the limit. But don't rely on the tax that you receive from it to base your budget on it. So you got to decide one way or the other. Do we want people to not smoke, or is this how we're going to fund our budget? Because right now you can't, well, they're doing both, but they shouldn't be.
All right, gentlemen, we've come to that part of the program where we take a look at our crystal balls and political ether and try to make a prediction or tell our audiences what they should be paying attention to or looking out for. And so, Brad, we will start with you. What do you see coming up down the road?
We're going to get through this. Times will be well. Business is going to be reinvented. Now is the time, if you're thinking about getting in business or you are in business, figure out what your business is going to look like afterwards and start inventing yourself for that right now. Things will be fine. It will get a little bit worse before it gets better, but we will make it through.
Jamar?
Let me reiterate what Brad just said. This is going to end at some point. It may be changed. Life may look different. It may look different. Business may look different, but it will end. The second thing I foresee happening for progressive states, and I don't see it happening in Indiana, is a reform of how our elections happen. So there are some states, and Marion County put out a proposal about this, which was to do absentee and mail-in voting. That was excellent. I'd love to see that type of thing proliferate throughout the state of Indiana.
Pete?
I was going to say the primary will get pushed back, but that already happened. So I guess I was right. But my
You must read the
prediction
cheat sheet, too.
No, never. But my prediction would be that not only will this end at some point, when we'll see, but I think we will see a renewed trust in our institutions. We are seeing government, business, nonprofits, media even coming together and rising to the occasion. And that trust has been crumbling for years, for decades, and I think there will be a renewed sense of trust in our institutions moving forward.
I'm going to surprise you all and actually piggyback on something my good friend Brad Klopfenstein said. And once this crisis has run its economic course, I would not be surprised if lawmakers seriously take a second look at allowing more gaming and bars and taverns as a way to cushion folks for maybe the next time this economic crisis starts to pop up. I would not be surprised if those conversations start, actually maybe get a little bit further down the road than they ever have before. Gentlemen, as always, we appreciate you being with us. Our good friends, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Jamar Cobb-Denard, Republican Pete Seat. From all of us here at the Edge Media Studios, thank you all very much for being with us. We will get through the coronavirus outbreak. Just remember to wash your hands and just exercise good common sense, folks. There's no one to be afraid. Just be reasonable. Thank you all for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.